everybody. Welcome to this month's Zoominar, brought to you by the all-volunteer nonprofit organization 24 Hour Dallas. The mission of 24 Hour Dallas is to advocate for a nighttime Dallas that is safer, more inclusive, and more economically and culturally vibrant for residents, businesses, and guests. 24 Hour Dallas always asks, what kind of city do we want to be at night? So today we're going to focus on our city's independent bars and other small businesses that operate at night, but specifically bars. Independent bar owners and operators right now feel like they're kind of falling through the pandemic recovery cracks and won't necessarily make it through the winter. This is not unique to Dallas. This is happening around the planet. Plus, bar owners feel like they've been singled out unfairly, to tell you the truth, especially when they see restaurants with bars and stores and gyms and other kind of businesses seem to get different treatment when perhaps the risk of exposure isn't as high. Now, we are not ones to deny the role of the hospitality sector and the restaurant and bar sector in our public health. There are plenty of people who resent any kind of overreach of the government of any kind or any guidelines. We're not there, but we do like parity, and we're interested in that discussion today. So as we are on this day, on Tuesday, December 15th, bars are closed again in the state of Texas, leaving us with a lot of questions, including what is this going to do to our local economy and our workforce? And what independent bar relief is available. Our 24 Hour Dallas Zoominar panelists today are Jeff Brightwell. Jeff is a partner in Dot's Hop House and Cocktail Courtyard, a full-service bar and restaurant in Deep Ellum. He's also been a writer for about 20 years, as well as being an entrepreneur in the hospitality industry. Bryan Tony is a public policy professional, I like to say that, PPP, who has worked at the local, state, and federal levels of government. And his areas of expertise are workforce education, economic development, and transportation. Stephanie Keller Hudiburg, who's going to be joining us in a bit. She was pulled into some of the interviews with the City of Dallas police chief candidates, and that's a good place for her to be. She'll be joining us, and here she comes. She currently serves as executive director of the Deep Ellum Foundation, which I'll mention it here just a bit. And then Dr. Eric Anthony Johnson. Dr. Johnson is the chief for economic development, housing, and sustainable development with the City of Dallas. He's got a very deep expertise in economic development and community development. Dr. Johnson oversees both of those areas for the City of Dallas, along with housing, urban planning, historic preservation, real estate. I'm really surprised they didn't throw city utilities at you too, Dr. Johnson. Since he came to Dallas in March, his goal has been to drive both social and economic growth in Dallas. And we're glad to have caught your attention on Dallas's often overlooked nighttime economy. Before we begin, I want to give a shout out to our two sponsors, or three sponsors actually. The Deep Ellum Foundation, for which Stephanie is the executive director, is a nonprofit corporation that exists to enhance, improve, market Deep Ellum, a historic neighborhood. For those of you who are maybe on this call and not from the Dallas area, we have some. It's a historic neighborhood comprised of, in the past, largely arts and entertainment venues, but now much more residential, very near downtown Dallas in East Dallas. And then we also have the support today from both the beverage and the food service divisions, of course, of Benny Keith Company, which distributes produce, frozen foods, refrigerated goods, equipment, products, Anheuser-Busch beverages, craft beers, imported beers, for 100 years or more, to all of your favorite spots. So my name is Randall White. I am a volunteer and also the president of the board of 24 Hour Dallas. Now, before we begin, we're going to talk with each of our guests first, and then there'll be time for our panelists to talk with each other maybe, or answer some questions from you. We'll just kind of see. And then you can submit any questions using the Zoom Q&A or chat at the bottom. Some of our Panelists might respond to your chats as they come in, but we'll get to as many as we can when the time allows. And by Friday, we will post this to our 24-Hour Dallas website, which is 24hourdallas.org. And for our panelists, by the way, who's on this Zoom call? We have several bar owners and restaurateurs on the call today. We have other tourism and hospitality professionals who are on the call today. We have some folks from outside of the city of Dallas who might not be as interested in the specifics to Dallas, but are watching what we're doing here in Dallas with 24-Hour Dallas, our nighttime economy initiative. And then we also have, interestingly enough, some commercial real estate folks, as well as a handful of lawyers. And I haven't quite figured out why the lawyers are on the call today. Perhaps we'll know before the call is up. Anyway, so that's who's on our call. Ladies and gentlemen, or lady and gentlemen, welcome. I am going to begin with you, Jeff. Let's kind of frame things. As a bar owner, you have been out front. In fact, you were very early out front when the pandemic closures happened in the state of Texas. And I saw a YouTube video, I think, that you developed or created that you parked in front of the governor's eyes. And in the state of Texas, the governor has the ability to kind of issue kind of the closures and openings for various industries. So tell us a little bit about that chain of events that prompted the closures of bars in Texas and in Dallas specifically, and kind of it's led us to where we are now. It's just so we all can kind of get up to where we are and what it's meaning to your business.
Yeah, so, well, I guess, you know, you go back to early March, you start hearing things on the news about this new novel coronavirus. And by March 16th, Governor Abbott kind of just shut everything down. And we, along with everyone else, you know, closed our doors, thinking that this was going to be a 2 or 3 or 4 week inconvenience. Turned out to be much longer than that. And around, I want to say like May, late May 22nd, he waved his wand and allowed, I believe, restaurants to open up at a 25% capacity. And then I guess bars and restaurants were allowed near the end of May to open up at a much lower capacity. One that quite honestly was so low that a lot of the places wouldn't be able to, it's not worth opening at 25% just due to such small capacity. I'm sorry, someone is trying to get in on my phone there.
Yeah, that's all right.
Anyway, we, Dot's Hop House, we waited till June 17th to reopen, even though we could have opened earlier. Really being in such uncharted territory, we felt like we only had one chance to get it right. And so we wanted to have policies and procedures in for our staff and for our customers to try to make it as absolutely safe as possible without ruining the reason you go out in the first place, you know, the social aspect of things. So it's been a delicate balance there. And then June 26th, 9 days after we reopened, it was forced closure again. And one of the really frustrating things about that June 26th mandate by the governor was he closed, that was a Friday. He had closed bars across the state on that day, but restaurants were allowed to remain open until Monday. Now that slapdash approach, what he missed there is that, you know, the 3 days that anyone in this business are really open for are Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? The rest of the days, you just kind of suffer through and do as best you can. Well, everyone is ordering on a Wednesday or a Thursday to prep for the weekend, whether it be food or alcohol or what have you. And so he really left places like ours where we have a full kitchen
Right.
Well, there you go. You just spent thousands of dollars preparing for your weekend, and now what are you going to do with it? You know, the approach, it didn't seem like there was rhyme or reason other than let's just scapegoat the bars. No thought put into that. Maybe different models function differently, right? Our space, for example, is 10,000 square feet of it is outdoor.
Right.
And so
It's a beautiful space, by the way. It's a beautiful space. Dots is gorgeous. Yeah.
I appreciate that. It was a labor of love. Yeah, so, you know, I get that you can't necessarily, you know, you can't play favorites or whatever. But if you're saying, hey, outdoor dining at restaurants can be 100%, but you're a bar, you have to be closed completely, and yet 66% of my sales potential is outdoors, then, you know, what's going on there?
Right.
So yeah.
Well, tell me, you know, I'm going to break in right here. This is not a planned. You used a word that I've been actually pondering. You used the word scapegoat. Bars being scapegoated. Is that the general sense you think of your colleagues, other bar owners, that bars have been kind of singled out for some reason? I saw some discussion in some of the parts of the United States where some people felt like because bars they involve alcohol and there's all that kind of, you know, moral element to that people just weren't willing to go out on a limb in support of advocating for bars. Is that?
I think absolutely that is the case. I'm all for, and I said it in the video, I'm all for, I believe, you know, as humans, we are all in this life together, right? And so if it means, if it's for the greater good, for bars to be closed, for restaurants to be closed, then so be it. But help us. And, you know, Texas being the buckle of the Bible Belt, alcohol's been vilified in this state since the end of Prohibition, certainly. And you think about some of our archaic alcohol laws. You can't buy packaged alcohol on a Sunday before noon. If you're in a restaurant before noon, it has to be served with food. You know, all these crazy things. Liquor stores have to close at 9.
Yeah,
you know.
we also see that, I guess, with the dance hall ordinances in the city of Dallas. It all seems to kind of be like a residual from a time in the past.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let me ask you. Stephanie just sent a message here that says she gets to go back and interview some more police chiefs. So I'm going to come to you in just a second, Stephanie, police chief candidates. But I do want to ask you one more question before I come back to you. Jeff, did you apply for Paycheck Protection Program funds through DOTS? And did you receive that?
We did. It was a moving target. It took about 4 rounds of paperwork. The questions kept changing, what have you, and it was tense, very tense. You know, a lot of people didn't get it, but we did, and that was great. But 8 weeks of help versus 7 months of closure. You know, at some point.
Right. So it hasn't been enough to sustain you, or?
No. So going into it, you know, we were very lucky at DOTS when we opened this place with so much of our earning potential outdoors. You know, we kind of played the what if game of, if we had a month of weekends where it rained every weekend, that would be damaging. You know, that could potentially be fatal. So we literally had a rainy day fund set aside. And so we never expected the rainy day to be a virus, but we were certainly positioned much better than a lot of people, as most everyone in this industry knows. It's, you know, it's difficult. It's one of those things where things of this nature are damning to our industry when we have no government help. And yet they're very quick to help out the billion-dollar industries like the airlines and such.
Right, right. And I was, to tell you the truth, not to cast any aspersions on any particular faiths or anything, but I was really kind of alarmed this morning to read about the $4.4 million PPP that went to a church in Houston. So, and I thought that could have bailed out a good part of the nighttime economy of Dallas. So one more question of you, Jack, and it's come in from somebody who's watching. How do bars push back against the generalization that restaurants are more intimate environments, that bars are more intimate than restaurants and more dangerous in the COVID area? How do you respond to that?
It is, I can appreciate the hypothesis that comes with, hey, consumption of alcohol lowers inhibitions, people stop wearing masks, they get closer, what have you. Like, as a hypothesis, great. But what the government's not done is any sort of contact tracing. Let's use science to prove out your policies, and if they prove out, then okay. But it's when you start looking at the numbers and you start seeing restaurants in the middle of a pandemic, restaurants that are never in the top 20 sales of alcohol in Dallas County, suddenly doing $250,000 a month in alcohol sales. Well, now they've just become bars, right? And so I have to be closed, but they can continue. People are going to adjust. We're social animals,
right?
So they're gonna find it. What we've learned, the grand experiment of prohibition does not work, right? And so this is just, I'm not saying that that's what they're after right now, but by prohibiting bars, you're just driving people to get it elsewhere, right? And they're still going to congregate. So if they're going to do it, if alcohol is truly the problem, then on-premise consumption anywhere should be stopped until this problem is solved.
Because it's fair.
Because it's fair.
And if they are going to limit what you can do, then out of the public good, they also need to help provide some financial relief in order for you to be able to sustain being closed, because
absolutely
you didn't ask for this. Okay.
Right.
Well, I'm going to jump over here to Stephanie before we lose her to one of the police chief candidates, and then I'll come back to Bryan. And we're zeroing in on you, Dr. Johnson. Stephanie is the executive director of the Deep Ellum Foundation. Certainly, how many businesses are in Deep Ellum?
Gosh, we have over 400 businesses in Deep Ellum, over 100 of which are bars and restaurants.
Okay, and so this is your constituency. These are your members. These are the people you advocate for, you're messaging for, you're promoting. You're also trying to intercede with any kind of conflicts that happen at City Hall or even at the state. So several months back, the Deep Ellum Foundation kind of drafted a document to get in front of the governor. Tell us about that, and what was the result of that?
Yeah, so actually it was targeted both at the governor, but really also at the federal level. And so we had conversations with Senator Cornyn's team, with several other senators on Capitol Hill. And the intent there was really, we need to see a COVID relief package, and sooner than later. And so we were hoping to push for something prior to the elections. You just heard from Jeff, similar things that we heard from our business community across the summer. By the end of the summer, when we were drafting the letter in late August, we had seen people run out of their PPP if they did get it. By that time, people were running out of rent relief options, and frankly, running out of their own savings, their own insurance. People were really stretched. And so at that time, we did start surveying our businesses in a formal way, in addition to hearing anecdotes. And we found, similar to what you're going to hear Bryan share, around 50% told us if they didn't get some sort of relief within the next 3, 6, 12 months, they're going to be forced to close. And so the intent there was really to push for COVID relief. We did have 60 co-signatures, both from our local business community, but also from organizations, partner organizations, all the way from national groups like the National Independent Venue Association, all the way to the Dallas Arts District, Greater Dallas Restaurant Association. And so it really was a group push. Our thought there being, of course, we're just one community, but we are really a community that packs an economic punch and really paints the picture of what's happening here, because Deep Ellum is largely independent businesses, small businesses, particularly a hub for bars, restaurants, music venues, galleries, performance venues, some of our hardest hit industries as part of this ongoing pandemic. And so, in alcohol sales alone, Deep Ellum generates about 10 million in alcohol sales per year, and that's on top of an additional 10 million in property taxes we've seen over the last couple of years from the district, et cetera. And so for us, we think it's the perfect case study. If we want to see these small businesses survive, we were hearing from them at the time, and we are continuing to hear from them that they need economic relief. And so that's what we're pushing for. As you all know from the election, we are not looking to see something from the federal level anytime soon. We're going to keep pushing at the state level and hope to see something for the spring session. But our fear is by that time, frankly, it might be too late for a lot of our businesses.
Right. Do you have any sense of how many businesses right now are closed or closed permanently in Deep Ellum?
Yeah, so fortunately for us, so far we do have. It's already tough to do business in Deep Ellum. You have to be at the top of your game to be doing business in Deep Ellum because it's a competitive environment. And so we have had closures. It's been far less than we've expected, frankly, and we do expect to see the closures, the majority of them, probably happening in the next 6 months or so, like I mentioned. And so luckily, I can actually count the closures, the permanent closures, on my two hands. And we've had more businesses actually open during that time than closed. But that said, they are piecing it together day to day, dealing with decision fatigue. And so right now, I think people are kind of like, oh, they've been able to make it. They're holding on. Well, no, now's where it's really become even more tough than it was in the summer. And we might see the worst impacts yet to come.
And also we tend to think of the businesses being the ones that are trying to survive. We're also not necessarily thinking all the time or articulating all the time the employees, the workers that have got to pay their rent before the month's up, or else they're going to be out in many instances, or the vendors who are providing the product to you, Jeff, that because you didn't have enough time to cancel the order. The impact, the secondary and the tertiary impact, even in terms of transportation, all the new innovations that Deep Ellum was looking at in terms of shared rides and this kind of stuff. So it's also had that second effect. Do you agree with that, Stephanie?
Absolutely. Like I mentioned, economic powerhouse. It's the #1 entertainment district in the region, but it has those spillover benefits. And that's just direct numbers. So as you mentioned, there are spillover benefits that aren't listed. The National Independent Venue Association talks a little bit about those just from our performance venues. It's really in the billions of dollars that these businesses have spillover effects. When somebody comes down to a bar or restaurant, they might stay and shop at some of our retail. They might go to another vendor. They might go to a show. And so it really is all connected in a community like ours. And so I'm concerned that we're still yet to see the worst.
And again, too, also there are some of the best music venues, live music venues are in Deep Ellum as well. We typically don't know where to lump them. Are they a bar? What are they? But they also rely a lot upon alcohol sales, bar sales, and there are music venues, and there's the music industry that's also affected by this. There's a lot of discussion about the independent music venues struggling here and in Europe, and that seems to not getting quite the traction I thought it would be at one point. So the Deep Ellum Foundation's mindset always has been, we support CDC standards. We're about safety. We're about public safety. No one's going to push back on safety guidelines. Correct? I hear that. That's accurate. I see even.
Of course.
Yeah.
Everybody's responding, I think, as best they can with the information that we have at the time.
Right. And so tangibly, what does it mean? You see in some other markets and some other places in Europe in particular, they're doing things like curfews. They're issuing early closures, which never makes much sense to me. It's like daylight savings time. Let's trim it off here, but add it up here. Well, let's start later. What's that about? But what's the message there for those folks that want to say, let's just roll up the welcome mat and close down these areas? What's the impact from your perspective, Stephanie, in Deep Ellum in particular, and perhaps in some of the other sociable districts in Dallas? What's the impact mean to the city of Dallas per se, not just spiritually, but also financially?
Yeah, absolutely. Starting with that, as I mentioned, it is an economic powerhouse. And so the financial hit in terms of even just the revenue for the city of Dallas is tremendous. You obviously know, and of course, the pandemic has hit everybody, but Deep Ellum's been the main attractor as far as corporate relocations. Dallas has struggled with that a little bit compared to our peers in the region. It's the biggest tourist draw in the region that serves when we have the convention business, et cetera. This is where people want to come when they come explore Dallas. But on top of that, it really is, it's an authentic community, and no one walks away from Deep Ellum with the same experience. And so those 400 businesses, especially those ones that I mentioned that have been our hardest hit, that are kind of public gathering places, Deep Ellum's where people come to gather. And so in terms of the culture, Deep Ellum was just named this year one of the state's cultural districts. It is something that when we all come out of this pandemic era, these are the places that people get together. It's where people make memories. It's where people, frankly, are finding innovations and new ways of doing things. Deep Ellum has historically been a place where, you know, it might be a restaurateur that was inspired by the history of actually the early musicians like Blind Lemon Jefferson, that's doing something creative, but in turn they inspire we have a lot of creative businesses like design shops, branding companies that office out of Deep Ellum because they're inspired by the environment here. A lot of our tech companies, Mark Cuban started his first business out of Deep Ellum. And so there's all those spillover benefits. And so you're going to see all of that take a hit. And back to the COVID kind of point and what we're all following, I do want to just take a moment on that too, because I think it's important to dispel some myths. I think, you know, bars and restaurants are getting a bad rap. There's a lot of media attention to, oh, the bars are, you know, we've got rogue actors, we've got people out here, you know, breaking the rules. And I've been in conversation with the code department throughout the last couple months, including as recently as last week. And they've shared with me that each and every business that they visited in Deep Ellum has been in compliance at some point. And so, you know, overall, I would say our businesses are doing their best on a day-to-day basis to make things happen. They are doing their best to keep their patrons safe. We're seeing everything from improving their spaces to using kind of fog machines and fireside. And I mean, really going above and beyond to keep their employees and their businesses and their customers safe. And so we are seeing a couple incidents on occasion where, for example, again, back to that decision fatigue, somebody might be moving from a bar status to a restaurant status with the new state laws. And, you know, they don't have enough tables. So Code has been educating them about that. But by and large, they haven't actually been that concerned about Deep Ellum because people are just doing their best. We've done things like work with our businesses, for example, that tend to have lines that form outside their business to put out sidewalk markers. So to encourage people to social distance, because, you know, as Jeff kind of mentioned, people are going to do what they're going to do. They're not used to how to act in this new environment. And so people, I think, on the business side are doing their best. And I think most importantly from our end, we're trying to support them because in order to do those measures, that's also a financial hit. And so a lot of our businesses are taking additional investment to improve their spaces, to test their staff. And so Jeff has launched or really pivoted our grant opportunities to what we call a COVID pivot fund to help our businesses cover costs like testing, like having the right PPE, like having space improvements to make sure their spaces are safe. And so I think that's important to realize too, that, you know, not only are they taking a financial hit and, you know, increasingly having a revenue hole, they're also doing their best to keep you all safe and all of us safe when we come to visit and taking that additional investment to do so.
Yeah, and I hear your assistant crying in the background, Stephanie. Also before I let you go to your interviews with potential police chiefs, well, there's one assumption people. Well, it's not an assumption. There's one thought a lot of people don't keep in the front of mind is that bars and restaurants are in the health business. You know, it's not like these are businesses that are the first time health inspectors have ever visited them. You know, so you're more mindful than most businesses about what keeps a customer safe. You're used to food management and food handling and cleanliness and standards like that. So these are businesses that do care about the public health. They're not. If you don't, you're not going to have business. And what's the point of that? Correct?
That's right.
Well, I appreciate it. I know you've got to slip away from us. If you can join us, come back and join us. You mentioned something else I'm going to actually use as a segue to jump to Bryan. Stephanie said something about employee testing and that kind of stuff. It's very interesting in some of the work you and I have been doing the last couple of days, Bryan, about what other cities are doing and what are other benchmarks being, Dr. Johnson, that other cities are taking as they're working with their restaurants and their bars and their nighttime businesses. And one of the things I found is one city, Bryan, I don't know if I shared this with you, that is actually, the city is doing COVID screening specifically for the hospitality employees, so that there's one place where those folks could come instead of this scattershot thing of, do I go over here? Do I go here? Do I go there? But the city is actually managing it. This is a service to the hospitality sector and the service industry sector where they're providing screenings. Bryan is working on something for us specifically. He's been gathering some data. He took some initiative by talking with some of the bar owners, some of Jeff's colleagues, about how can we gather and quantify what we know about the impact of the coronavirus pandemic right now on bars and other small businesses and operators and owners and managers in the city of Dallas. And what do we know? So from some of the preliminary data you're already gathering, Bryan, bring us all up to where you are and what the data you've gathered and what you're beginning to see.
Happy to. Thanks, Randall. Unfortunately, much of what Stephanie and Jeff have already talked about is bearing itself out in what we're seeing from our preliminary survey results so far. This is a survey done by 24 Hour Dallas, combining with some of the results that the Deep Ellum Foundation conducted earlier on this fall. And ultimately, what we're seeing is when an owner-operators like Kim Finch and Thunderbird Station, whose merch I'm repping, do their best to honor the CDC guidelines and scale back their offerings, the results are devastating. Of our 70 respondents, 58% have lost more than half of their revenue this year compared to 2019. Pre-COVID, they employed an average of about 22 people per business, and 75% of them were spending at least $25,000 a month on their payrolls, wages, benefits, and the like. Now they're down to an average of 9 or 10 people, if they're open at all, and only 18% are spending at least that amount of money, $25,000 or more a month on their payrolls. It's even more difficult to shed non-employee related costs, the overhead like rent and utilities. So those cuts reduced spending on other expenditures, PR and marketing, to-go services, all of that, and lower sales taxes have downstream economic impacts on people's lives and Dallas's economy, with our surveys just representing a small sample of our service industry sector here in Dallas.
Okay, and so that's really kind of, that's disturbing, but it's not surprising. And as we're kind of realizing that even perhaps for some of these businesses, they're probably at the end of whatever resources they have left or nearing the end. Independent restaurants don't have the financial backing of national chains or the hotel chains that have a bar parked in them. So they haven't got that kind of a safety net. These are many times mom and pop shops who have the all on the line. And so to hear that many of them are already at that end point and that many others may be near that very quickly is sad for our city. Again, for all the reasons you've heard already, not just because of the employment base, the workforce, the tax base, the contributions to the state through the liquor sales tax, the attraction for tourism and other reasons, and business development. I want more businesses moving to Dallas and not moving to Frisco. I'm sure Dr. Johnson would agree with me on that. So, and this kind of thing with today's workforce, the places like this in our city's urban core are what make it attractive for today's workforce in many ways. So tell me, what do we know about other states or cities and what other places are doing specifically to assist their independent nighttime businesses, that maybe ones that have received paycheck protection funds or other forgivable loans, but maybe the ones that have not? What are other cities doing, Bryan?
Right. Yeah, without that relief from the federal level, there have been a couple, the Restaurants Act and Save Our Stages Act. Somebody mentioned that in the chat today, that we're hoping will get through Congress, but in the middle of a transition, it's nearly impossible for that to get down to the finish line and into the direct benefit of our local industries. leaders and our partners here across the state. So some states have taken it into their own hands. Colorado held a special session that led to an economic aid package. Other states, Ohio, Minnesota, California, have all gavelled in. And unfortunately here in Texas, we have a biennial once every couple of years legislature, and we didn't get that opportunity. So we will be using some of this survey data to inform the state level advocacy, but at the local level, there are some ways that we can get creative. I think it first begins by targeting funding and dedicating some funding specifically to the industries that need it the most, whether it's childcare providers or whether it's restaurant owners and bars. Those are some of the ones that have the hardest time navigating the new rules and procedures that are coming out daily. And so Seattle and Austin both set up a couple funds that were just dedicated to these industries. And it didn't mean that they had to reapply necessarily. There have already been a lot of applications, I'm sure, collected through our small business continuity fund and other that we have those relationships with, and local area chambers of commerce, that we can get this word out and vet those applications in a faster fashion if we are able to set something up. You mentioned Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. That was the local centrally located testing site, and working with the county. Is there a way that we could work with Dallas County and pool our resources together for a central Dallas location that would offer free testing? Because those are antigen tests, rapid, are still $149 a person. And some of our restaurants and bars are taking that cost on themselves to benefit their employees, which is what we want to see them do for everybody's safety. And then finally, you sent over another recent article from Rochester, New York, what they're doing and delaying some of their on-sale liquor licenses. Every time there's a permit or fee that the city of Dallas is requiring out of its $1.4 billion budget, are there some of those that we can delay $100,000 or $200,000 now and recoup later on down the road when our bars are in a better state and able to be more fiscally solvent. So those are all types of things, and there are some non-monetary things. We've seen the Parklet program begin to open up some of our required patio parking that Jeff might have faced at Dodds and other small businesses, and those have definitely helped and got some funding to do that. But what more can be done? And I know Dr. Johnson will go into this. We can work with the TABC. We can renew our special use permits for alcohol sales, signage, and the like. There are plenty of opportunities that we hope to identify here in the next couple of weeks, and have been acquiring through this survey that'll inform that.
Okay, so thanks, Bryan. And would you mind posting for everybody to see if anybody's on the call and has not responded to the survey yet? Maybe you can put the link in the chat for everybody to be able to see, so that if you are a small business owner, a restaurant bar owner, you can go and complete that. I think your deadline is tomorrow this time. Is that right? So we can add your input into this document we're going to be compiling. So Dr. Johnson, here we are. Good to see you again. We've had a couple of good conversations over the last several months. We're glad to have you in Dallas. Until recently, Dallas has thought of itself as a 9-to-5 city. I like to kind of think that was really great for the 20th century, but the 21st century is a different kind of place. We don't all hop in our cars and go home at 5 anymore. Some of us are already home, as I think we can look from here. But before COVID, perspectives were beginning to change. People weren't working 9 to 5 like they used to. We have a very thriving nighttime economy already, not just from the hospitality and service industry, but also from the healthcare industry. I saw a study from London that said the leading employer at night in the city of London, in the UK, are home health professionals, and so which surprised me. So we have a nighttime economy already; it already exists here. So as we enter this as the hope begins to spring in terms of recovering, coming out of pandemic, and we begin to kind of enter the Great Reset, as I've seen it be called, how do you think, from a policy perspective at the local level, at the municipal level, how do you think the nighttime economy can or will regain the kind of regard and momentum it had prior to COVID?
That's a good question. I would say it begins with it becoming intentional in terms of speaking about the impact of the nighttime economy. And I'll tell you why that's important. We're in the process of working on the new economic development policy, and we'll be heading to the council in the first quarter around discussions with this policy. But I believe we're looking at a comprehensive approach, just not saying, oh, let's go and get some corporations, we'll do all of that stuff, but how we really create a comprehensive approach. And I also think it begins, in particular, long-term, with really quantifying that economic impact.
Right.
And I believe that economic impact can start to change the narrative in relation to the importance of the industry as part of the social and economic growth for Dallas. So, as you know, we're really in this sort of uncharted territory. But I do think that it provides an opportunity to think strategically about the reset that's coming and what those components should look like as part of a overall comprehensive economic development approach for Dallas.
Right. And, you know, it's interesting. That's been a discussion we've had for some time. We do not have that data. I'm trying to, and as an all volunteer organization that so far has operated with a budget of almost zero, we're trying to beg, borrow, and steal the kind of leadership and support and buy-in from those folks who could make that kind of impact study possible for us. Maybe have some things queued up, had some interesting conversations, but that kind of quantum science, data, math, that says these many people worked maybe pre-COVID, this was the impact. This is the kind of stuff you need to know, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it helps to change the narrative, because the perception, and I use the word perception in particular, let's say the bars as a perception, you know, that causes a problem, which is really not the case. But the perception drives reality. And I think you need to have things like an economic impact that shows the value of the nighttime industry, but specifically talking about certain segments in that sort of collective of what that impact is. So people can say, oh, wow, I had no idea. Oh, wow. So now I can start to think about it differently.
Right. And if this sector goes under, then this is what the effect of our budget's going to be. I'm going to have to pay more property taxes or whatever in order to pay my share of the police funding. So because we're losing revenue over here.
Well, I think that's important because we recently really rolled out this roadmap over the next 36 months. And the roadmap is really about how do we put in place the building blocks or build upon building blocks we really need for the future. So if we're talking about economic development, we should be talking about the nighttime economy and its correlation to what it does for the city of Dallas, what it does for creating a unique community, what it does for the overall sort of positioning of the city. So I would encourage you guys to really, you know, continue to talk about how you can get that impact done, because for city council members, I think that would be highly important.
Yeah, I agree with you. So one of the other interesting things it came up just a little while ago about this kind of chicken or egg thing. You know, you have housing underneath your purview, and we have economic under your purview. So there's this situation now we are currently in with employees of these businesses. They're suddenly going to be straining to pay their rent and cover their mortgage. So we may not wind up with more people having to, might even be homeless or in search of housing or more affordable housing because they haven't got the revenue coming in. What I've always wondered, in a healthy, well-managed city, what is the formula for the balance between a city investing in economic development, a city investing in housing and affordable housing, and that? What's healthy?
The answer to that question is really there is no economic development without affordable workforce housing. The two are basically connected at the hip. And what that basically means is there's no such thing as one market. There are multiple markets, and those markets should be in a position to provide housing at all levels, in particular to support the workforce. So if you really look at the top 25 growing job sectors in Dallas, they are not paying enough to cover the housing costs.
Right.
So we are looking at ways to really ramp up our tactics and strategies around housing. People tend to get confused about affordable housing and low-income housing. You know, when you look at the area median income in Dallas, is only $55,000, right? And a household should spend no more than 30% of their income on housing costs. And you do the math, we have a problem there, which also speaks to both economic growth in the sense of just not corporate relocations, but expansions, retention. It's a very important element. So it's something that we are looking very heavily at, and I think people around the city of Dallas is going to see even more greater work in that space. Because the perception is one that is skewed. A person working in the restaurant industry, working at the bars, working at the hotels. I mean, this is regular people just trying to make their way every single day. These are not people who are trying to say, let me scam the system to get something. And that is really what we're talking about. How do we create the space to do more along those lines?
Well, and also oftentimes, particularly in the nighttime economy, the folks that are working at night many times tends to be their second or third job. These are folks that are not, are more often people of color. These are persons who oftentimes have a single family, a single parent. And so they're juggling all that, particularly in the era of COVID, where they're getting home in time to then, start teaching the kids because they're home from school. It's a very complicated life when you're at that sector of our society. And the good thing about the bar and restaurant industry is this is a great place to get started. This is a great place to get a job. It's not like you can just step right into an IT position, but you can step right into the restaurant. Everybody's worked in a restaurant or bar at one point. Did you ever work in a restaurant or bar, Dr. Johnson?
Yep, I sure have.
Yeah, and as I did too. And so we understand what that means, and it's the service economy. And this sector also does so much to communicate how this city feels about its guests and its residents and its businesses. So tell me one other thing. I'm curious, particularly in terms of the bar industry. Bar industry is kind of a stepchild of, as you've heard, of even the hospitality sector. It's struggling. We're gonna pull some numbers together for you and put it together in a package of things. What can bars do from your perspective to improve their odds of stabilization, and how could the city help now? Independent bars, restaurant, other small retail businesses at night. What can these industries, this sector do right now, and how could the city help right now? I know you don't have any money right now because I've asked Councilman Thomas. There's nothing in this year. We don't know what's next, but what else could the city do right now?
Well, let me say this. I would say that right now, as we are starting to build out this economic development policy, we need to have conversations about the nighttime economy, because if we don't, we're going to miss the window of opportunity to do that. So I would say that's really number one. Number two, I would say that I'm talking about the bar industry in particular. It's got to be a way to start to communicate a different narrative about the nature of the bars, right? And start to work to frame that more in a positive, look, there's always bad apples that causes problems, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about changing that narrative, the authenticity, the culture, the economic impact. Who wants to go to a sterile community? If you want a sterile community, you can go out to the deep suburbs and be in a place where everything is the same.
Yeah, lots of choices there.
But what I'm really saying is we have to work to change that narrative, right? Because I haven't heard anyone in particular at the city say anything negative about bars, right? But in the long term, in the short term, I think everyone knows, we're going to get past 2020, 2021 is really sort of flip a coin.
Right.
We're going to go into budget discussions. If the CFO was here, she would tell you that, of course, we're going to have some challenges. We have to figure some things out. But that's really not an excuse, because we're not at a place in time where we can just say we don't have resources. You know, we have to look at creative ideas that we can really start to bring to the table. So I don't necessarily have like a sort of clear, like, boom, here it is. But what I am open to do is to work with you guys to test strategies and ideas, but to start to talk about what things of that nature could look like. You know, several council members have talked to me about this issue before, and I think everybody's trying to figure something out in terms of, you know, how do we start to march down this road?
Right. Well, I appreciate that. I think we all, 24 Hour Dallas appreciates that. I don't know that we've had that kind of commitment to say, hey, I want to work with you guys.
Well, let me say this too, though. I would like to invite 24 Hour Dallas to join the work on the roadmap, because what we're doing is we are trying to collect the thought leaders in the space to look at how we can start to generate resources beyond what we have. How do we connect the dots on the work we are putting together, so that over the course of the next 36 months, we got a different narrative taking place.
I've done, and perhaps that will also give us the kind of leverage we need to solicit some support from one of the major universities and one of the major financial institutions to do the research we need to quantify the kind of data that would really justify more support toward this sector, or a better understanding what the impact.
Well, that is what I think is really important. And if you ask about what we could do to help, we could actually help in that space as well, in terms of connect the dots. I'm just telling you, because we do. There's economic impacts across the board. I've seen economic impacts of public housing authorities, of course, airports, you know, stadiums, everything you name. And I do believe that this is something that we should also have some economic basis to start to drive, you know, policy discussions. You know, Bryan is there, he knows all about policy. So I think that would be really important.
Do you think that also, though, but again, I'm looking at how many businesses are going to be alive come March. Is it possible that given some of the information that Bryan's pulled together and our work with Jeff and some of the other bar owners and restaurant owners and some of the other sociable districts, as I like to call them, because entertainment district sounds a little too shallow for what's really going on. Do you think that if we put together a package of some sort that said, hey, what would be the possibilities or the prospects of the city looking at these kinds of things, waiving this fee in order for a business to be sustained a little bit longer? I mean, that's some of the kind of stuff we could also put in front of in front of you, in front of Councilman Thomas.
Yeah, here's what I would say. So I'm gonna draw the line in separation between administration and policy.
Okay.
Council has authority for policy. So I would say anything related to policy issues, you know, talking to council members about, you know, things of that nature would be the appropriate place. Parklets, for example. We took on the parklets after that came to us, and we started to look at a way to work on parklets, create a pilot, looking at what it could be long-term. So I would say conversations with council members around the policy issues related to the subject will be a good starting point.
Okay, I get it. I appreciate that. I'm big on roles and responsibilities, and your job is this, and your job is this. So let me come back. We've got about a few minutes here. I'm seeing one comment from someone who says, I'm a person who sells print marketing to you guys. I'm also one of the folks who's lost 100% of my business from your industry. I feel your pain. So among the people on our call today are vendors to the restaurant and bar sector. Let me ask you, Jeff, I'm going to come back to you. There was one other question I wanted to ask you, and I don't think I'm going to get to it. So let me just ask you this question. What's the most important thing you think that collectively, not just the city, but the community, there is no real, it's not like there's there isn't a local bar association except for the lawyers. Maybe that's why they're on this call. Maybe they thought that's what this was about. But what the advocacy group for bars, there really isn't one locally. There is one statewide, although I monitor their Facebook posts and stuff like this. I don't have a lot of sense that they've gotten a lot of traction at the state. I know the Restaurant Association for a while was kind of working with bars, but at some point it became, now we got to just focus on restaurant survival too. So from your perspective, what's the most important thing we can all do collectively to help nighttime businesses, bars, restaurants, music venues, retail survive right now? From your perspective, what's the most important thing?
From the consumer side of things, it would simply be frequent your favorite spots. Christmas around the corner, buy some gift cards for some friends, just whatever you can do to get dollars into those registers and into the servers and bartenders pockets.
Yeah.
I'll say this. I don't tend to like to talk numbers, but year over, our weekday sales are down about 75%. Weekend sales on a good weekend are down about 50%. And it's one of those things, like you can limp along a little bit like that, but
not for long.
Yeah,
and the margins aren't great. I mean, I hear the times I hear restaurateurs and bar owners talk to me about what their margins are, especially when they're talking about third-party home delivery services. And I go, oh my gosh, there really is not going to be much left for you. I'll give it to the restaurant and bar industry, in terms of pivoting. Take home mixes for your own mixers and beverages at home, to-go foods, this kinds of stuff. Very smart, clever, innovative. You have to, the creative class has got to pull us out of this. But I hear you on the revenue and the loss of this. And so I guess collectively, perhaps in what we talked to Bryan and put together in a package, maybe one of the things we can include to the city of Dallas is the prospect of the city helping advocate with us in Austin as we enter new legislative session. Perhaps that's something. They've got a lobbyist in Austin. You probably know who that is. And we probably could work with them. We're a 501c3. There are certain things we cannot do, but perhaps if we felt like there were other champions, industry leaders who could be our voice that we cannot necessarily be. Bryan, from your perspective, what's the most important thing we can do to help restaurants, bars, venues survive right now?
In addition to supporting local, keep building this awareness, having these kind of discussions and amongst your friends and professional networks as well is extremely important. The more quantitative and qualitative data we get on the survey is awesome. You can definitely feel free to share that. But at the end of the day, if folks don't understand how important our 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. time frame is, it's a whole half of our 24 hours and 7 days a week and 365 days a year. The more we can optimize that, the better off as a city and healthier city will be, and safer, more inclusive. So follow 24-Hour Dallas. I'll plug you too, Randall, and all of our social media platforms. Thank you for hosting. And we'll keep everybody posted as well when the time comes to translate these ideas to action, because we do have to hold our elected officials accountable. And we have made presentations before in the past to council as well. And we do need follow-up. So thank you.
We do have good friends. We
tuning in.
do have good friends at City Hall who get it, and whose districts, who they really value their districts in the city council districts that are so strong with the nighttime economy. Dr. Johnson, one last question to you then. What's the most important thing we can do right now?
Well, we all know what that answer is, but
I like to hear it.
Minus financial support, of course, which is the elephant in the room. I would say the most important thing, I would just say really that level of awareness around the impact. I just think that has got to get achieved, because I believe that helps to change the narrative.
Gotcha.
Right? And look, there's other cities are doing it. New York in particular.
Yeah.
I've seen the numbers, and
yeah.
There's some staggering numbers, but people just don't know about it.
Right, right.
You know?
Yeah, the economic impact studies, we have a couple of them parked on the website at 24hourdallas.org.
Yep.
I think we have the city of New York's, the mayor's economic impact study. When we have the London economic impact study, several of the cities have taken that initiative. 24 Hour Dallas is one of the few nonprofit independent organizations that's focused on the nighttime economy, of about 50 different entities around the world that are working on that. Most of those entities that are working on the nighttime economy are actually departments of the city. And perhaps down the road, Bryan and I have talked about someday, perhaps the city of Dallas would like to have a night mayor, as is very common in European capitals. It's basically an assistant city manager level position, somebody whose job is to triage the stuff that happens at night. Our time is wrapped up. I appreciate you all for dialing in. Thank you for being here. Let me say that next month we're going to have another Zoominar on the January 25th, Monday at 4 p.m. It's called That's Amore. We're going to have three entrepreneurs in the pizza industry join us. David Cole of E. Fratelli, Sammy Mandel of Greenville Avenue Pizza Company, and Con Nguyen of Zalat Pizza. Three competitors. I have no idea what's going to happen out of this, but we are going to talk about that business model and how that's being very successful. It's almost pandemic proof, and how a lot of other businesses and restaurants are actually going, put pizza out. It's doing well. So finally, I'd like to thank our guests, Dr. Johnson, Bryan Tony, Jeff Brightwell. Thank you very much for joining us. And Stephanie, who's not with us anymore, I'll talk to her later. I'd also like to thank Deep Ellum Foundation and both the beverage and food service distribution divisions of Benny Keith Company for helping us. Please become a member of 24 Hour Dallas. Go to our website, 24hourdallas.org. Membership is $25 for an individual and annually, or $100 for an organization or business for a year. Help us deliver some of these things you heard are needed right now. I'm particularly keen on this economic impact study that we need to change the narrative, as Dr. Johnson said. Without adequate attention between what happens, as Bryan said, between 6 p.m. and 6 a.m., our city is leaving half of its potential on the table. Thank you for joining us. My name is Randall White, and may your holidays be a blessing. Thank you, gentlemen.